Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. As was pointed out repeatedly in the past, the essential theme of Surah Al-Fatiha was Tawheed and Risala and accountability. And the essential theme of the Quran, the essential message of the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This was the same message that was given to Adam alayhi salam and to all the Anbiya that followed. And it is the message that was given to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, which he then delivered to the Arabs directly and to humanity at large. As opposed to Tawheed, we have multiple different perspectives. Some directly in contradiction to Tawheed, and some totally outside of that. So, with regard to those who believe, we have Muslims, as I pointed out previously, we have the mu'min and we have the muhsin. And with regard to those who disbelieve, we have the mushrik, we have the kafir, and then we have the munafiq. Each of them interacts with the idea of Tawheed in his or her own way. The interesting thing is that shirk, for instance, as much as it is described and defined as the belief in multiple gods, the Quran itself bears testimony that these very mushriks, these very pagans, وَلَئِن سَأَلْتَهُمْ مَنْ خَلَقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ لَيَقُولُنَّ اللَّهِ. If you had to ask them, these very pagans, if you had to ask them who created the heavens and the earth, they would tell you with a double emphasis, with the lam and the noon, with a double emphasis that Allah created the heavens and the earth. So this idea of Allah was never ignored or denied. It was compromised. With regard to kufr didn't exist as blatantly then as it did, or it still does to some extent, but certainly did in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, as the total denial of the existence of a supreme being. What was present at that time, during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, were certain manifestations of kufr. So they denied, for instance, the afterlife. And it says, وَمَا يُهْلِكُنَا إِلَّا الدَّهْرِ. Time kills us. There is no higher being. There is no predestination. You live and then you reach a point, and that's your point of expiry. When you've reached your expiry date, you die. So that certainly is an element of atheism as we understand it today. But until the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment in particular, that the idea that God didn't exist entirely, didn't exist itself. When you examine early philosophers, their primary objective was to prove that God existed. Their point of departure was that God does exist because we do. And now we have to prove that. It is only in the modern age, as best reflected in a conversation between a French philosopher and Napoleon. And ironically, this takes place in Egypt, in Cairo. When he explains to him this modern idea of looking at life and looking at creation through a scientific lens. And after he had made his explanation to Napoleon, Napoleon then asked, where is God in all of this? And so this philosopher scientist says, we don't need God in this. So that was a building block of what came to be known as atheism. We've gotten past that stage because you cannot prove the existence of a non-existent, which is what atheism is. So we find ourselves in this particular era of skepticism, agnosticism, irrelevance, total irrelevance. But the growing phenomenon in this society, in the modern world, is actually a new form of shirk. And we're not talking about the shirk as described by the Quran or by the Sunnah and by the ulama as the worship of material things and so on. But it is the celebration of deities, of cultures, of performances wherein Allah does not exist. But a particular idea, a particular idol exists. It is, and the world celebrates that. You would have an entire show that revolves around the idea of the Aboriginal God, celebrating the Aboriginal God in New York City, and so on. So we've traveled a great deal, but the idea of Allah, Tawheed, and His oneness is still very much present amongst us. And inshallah, tomorrow we'll talk about the role you and I have to play. Our ancestors, starting with the Prophet ﷺ, they certainly played their role. When we spoke about the empires and we spoke about the ulama, they certainly played their role. That was the past. This is now. And we face new challenges. So inshallah, we'll talk about that in the future.